Okay, welcome back. 1:30 on the nose. Here we go. Stefan, please proceed. Looks like we're at Wyoming Life Resource Center.
Mr. Chairman, members of the
275.
committee, we are on page 275. I'll hand it over to Mr. McVicker.
Yeah, page 275, there are two exception requests. This is Unit 2512, the Wyoming Life Resource Center. The first one is on page 279. This is similar to the one we saw at the state hospital with the permanent land funds and equipment. So it's a request for permanent land funds to cover some of the equipment and repairs they need there.
Okay, any questions about?
Page 280 is the second one. It's an HR consolidation. So similar situation with the HR folks at the Wyoming Life Resource Center.
Okay, please proceed.
That completes behavioral health. So we are on to the last.
We could have done
division.
that with lunch, before lunch, couldn't we?
So we're on to the last division, division on aging. And so page 288, it starts with 501 administration. And there are two exception requests in this unit.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you will turn to page 290, you will see our first request in the aging division on the issue I mentioned this morning, which is the direct ARPA funds for the Older Americans Act program that was granted out from the federal legislation, but there are state matching requirements on this. So you'll see a couple of these requests throughout the aging division, and this is the first one. As a reminder, the governor has recommended denial of these requests. We concur for the time being, given that there could be a congressional fix to that state matching requirement, either eliminating or reducing that, and potentially some other policy options where we could leverage the federal ARPA funds that are sitting in the aging division right now. Between now and the beginning of the session, we will update this committee on the ongoings of those discussions if we think that is a likely course of action that the feds will fix. If not, we can have that conversation with you all either at our callbacks or offline to determine what the best course of action with using those funds is.
and is there any possibility or likelihood that for something like the Department of Aging that could turn into a maintenance of effort concept?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great question. I don't believe in that section of the ARPA law there are any.
Yeah, I mean outside of ARPA necessarily. It'd be more like preschool all of a sudden just shows up.
Mr. Chairman, no, since these would be relegated to the aging division, I don't see that as a risk, but certainly we'll update you if that changes.
Okay.
Page 291, the second budget request. This is another, you're going to see several of these. They're all related to the Older Americans Act. They're all to get rid of B11s. So they're all federally funded, not in our budget, but we generally do B11s during the biennium form. So requesting to add that to the budget.
Okay, please proceed.
Page 294, unit 5002. There are 4 exception requests in this unit.
Mr. Chairman, if you and the committee will turn to page 295, at the bottom of that page, you'll see the first exception request, excuse me, related to the Wyoming Home Services Program. This is a request to restore the funding for the 23-24 biennium for the Home Services Program. As a reminder to the committee, this is a home services program that serves the elderly and the disabled who generally do not qualify for Medicaid or the Medicaid long-term care waiver and receive some supports, some home care, case management, care coordination in their home and communities, typically provided through partners in our senior center network. As a bit of background, last session, Wyoming Home Services was both a step 2 and a step 3 proposed reduction. The step 2 proposed reduction was to reduce Wyoming Home Services by half in the 21-22 biennium, and then cut the program effective July 1st of the following year. The step 3 reduction was to make that cut immediately. When the legislature would convene and make that decision. The amendment and the joint conference committee conversation that unfolded at the end of the session was to add the funding back for the Wyoming Home Services. And I think the intent was to do that. I certainly won't speak for the legislature writ large, But the conversations that certain legislators had with me and that we had with this committee was that the intent was to fund that for the remainder of the biennium and at least fund half of it into the next biennium. The two requests, both on page 295 and 296, are related to what I believe is maybe unintended consequence from the legislative action, wherein the entire remaining budget of Wyoming Home Services for the second fiscal year of this biennium was ultimately removed, and the full funding for this program for the 23-24 biennium was also removed. And we essentially learned of that after the legislative interpretation SAO budget loading that happened, a couple of months after the session. So this request would be to do, these two requests would do two things: restore home services for 23-24 biennium
At the full price.
at the full price, and also an effective immediate request that you see on page 296 to restore the second half of the current biennial funding in this biennium. The Department of Health has been front loading that with general funds for the current biennium. And so these two requests together would essentially make Wyoming Home Services whole for this biennium and the next biennium. And you see that the governor has recommended approval of both exception requests. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, based on conversations with many of you about this program over the course of the last 9-10 months or so, the long-term plan for these types of services has been a topic of conversation with this committee and others, given that when we do have to trim budgets in times of downed revenue, this is a program that consistently rises to the top of our list, not because we don't like it or the services aren't good or important, but because it's 100% general fund and relatively small in the grand scheme of things. What we have discussed with many of you and other committees is a potential long-term plan to make this program more sustainable. By that, I mean looking to our federal partners at CMS of how we could potentially leverage federal funds to support a 100% general fund only program through various waiver mechanisms. All of those conversations with our federal partners this year that we have been very productive and helpful, but they're very informal. We don't have a waiver application out. We have not been directed to do that, but there is a potential if we look to 25-26 biennium and beyond, that a potential Medicaid vehicle through waiver type programs could grow the pie in this type of area and reduce the general fund cost exposure. The way that would look is we would essentially try to, just like our long-term care waiver, provide services to this population in a similar fashion, but for an expanded population that is pre-institutional as opposed to qualifying for nursing home level of care, which is a Medicaid requirement. There's various aspects that would have to be worked out with the feds of what would be allowable through a waiver application and through more formal discussion and consultation with them. But we would be looking to identify that population that may not qualify for the Medicaid waivers now, but could be at risk of institutionalization on a lower acuity type of assessment and potentially waiving some of the financial requirements that are typical in the Medicaid side of this type of service delivery. So again, I don't want to lead the committee down the wrong path and say that we have a plan to do this with Wyoming Home Services by July 1st. We don't. If that were a policy direction for the Department of Health that we were authorized or directed to engage in, this would likely be an 18 to 36 month process. When you think of designing waivers, applying for waivers, getting them approved, all of that back and forth in the bowels of the bureaucracy of CMS take a lot of time. But based on some of the direction from members on this committee, we did engage in those conversations to kind of discover the art of the possible, as it were, and see what we could do in this program to minimize the general fund risk. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there for any questions.
Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Johansson. My question is, you don't have direction now to apply for the waiver. Does that come legislatively or does it come from the governor?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, two things there. Number one, we could receive direction from the governor to begin that process. and CMS would engage with us based on that direction. What they typically like to see in any type of waiver program, whether it's home and community-based waivers, Medicaid expansion, what have you, at some point, there's a commitment they look for from the state, especially if there's a financial exposure there. So I think at some point, that would be necessary if this is an actual thing that the state would want to do. But first and foremost, I think what could be beneficial is simple direction, and totally up to this committee or others in the legislature to engage in those conversations. Some policy direction would be helpful and would, I think, spearhead our ability to work more formally with CMS.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman, to Dawn, is if the committee had a discussion and determined that they would like to pursue that in an effort to relieve general fund obligations and expand that, can we put that in a footnote, or would it need to be a separate bill?
I think it would need separate legislation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
a question on this program, and it says in the fiscal year 2020 that there was 1,882 clients were served. It also talks about that there's no means testing to participate in the program. How much of that cost was billed back out to those recipients, and what was the revenue associated with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I don't believe there's patient revenue that's collected, and you're right, it is not means tested. Ms. Oswald can correct me if I'm wrong.
But there's a sliding scale based upon income. Right? Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, so we do have some staff, or I'm sorry, residents or clients, they do have to be in. It's all based on self-attestation, and it's on a scale. And so those funds go back to the senior center, and they try to help offset their costs. So we don't collect the money, but they do collect funds from the client.
So, Mr. Chairman, follow up then on that. So how do we know that senior citizens know what the means are to be able to turn around and bill that back out to those? So at some point in time, somebody's got to know what somebody's worth, whether they can afford the service or not. Who makes that determination? Is that the senior center that then makes that determination and then bills those back out? And if that's the case, then what kind of auditing or spot checks is the department to do and making sure that those are adequate? And does each senior citizen center then set their own criteria? Just more explanation on the program.
Mr. Chairman, I might be able to clarify this. So we basically
Okay, just let's, Mr. Chairman, what exactly is an informal means testing? Because I'm not familiar with that either.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's my apologies. I'm just, they self-attestation on how much they think they can afford. So it is not a means test such as for other programs that we have.
And
It is more self-attestation.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, this is over the years, one of the reasons the legislature, this committee, and the department have looked at this program for efficiencies is unlike the Medicaid side of home and community-based services, which is extremely strict, both on categorical, acuity, eligibility, and financial means. This is almost the opposite of that. There are, I'll phrase it this way, most of our senior centers, a lot of what they do is through the Older Americans Act programs. This is not. This is purely state general fund, but their business as usual kind of model per those Older American Act guidelines, they are not means tested. In fact, the federal legislation in OAA prohibits that that you can't deny someone those services like home delivered meals or congregate nutrition because of their income. That that has carried over the years into a program like this, where the means testing, quite frankly, just isn't there. It's a policy decision, I think, if we would want to go in that direction. And part of the reason we've looked to CMS to see if we could add an additional tier to the long-term care waiver to capture this population would be looking at what would that cutoff be for means, but we do not have that now.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I mean, just as an observation, I mean, I work with elderly people all the time, and their number one fear is loss of independence, and oftentimes that's tied very closely to not having enough money to see out the end. And then that fear is, I mean, I have clients that have had literally millions of dollars in CD and cash in the banks, not spending their Social Security, and their biggest fears are going to run out of money. And I can guarantee you that client would have applied for benefits under this program, because that's just the way she was. So, I mean, so the point, somehow we got to, if you know, somehow we got to find a way to be better stewards of general fund dollars in particular.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Perkins, it's point well taken, and I completely agree. Just being frank and blunt, that is not the case right now in this program. I will mention, just as an observation, the number of clients served in the fiscal year, given the state's population and our elderly population, is quite low. I don't think there's an inundation of the wealthy that are members of the Wyoming Home Services program. But you're absolutely right. That is consistent feedback that we hear, that even if you have significant assets, those can be spent down very quickly in a nursing home or a long-term care setting. And this type of program could delay that.
So just to follow up on this, Stephen, it seems to me that, well, first of all, what other federal programs or state programs provide comparable or similar crossover services?
Mr. Chairman, the most comparable is our long-term care waiver in Medicaid, which serves a bit more population. And to give you a sense of the scale, we're talking in the tens of millions of dollars on a fiscal year for that program, because the services are much more comprehensive. It's a home and community-based waiver, similar to our DD waivers, but that provides home care for the elderly and disabled, and a lot more in-person nursing, in-home care, home modifications, things like that. This program is just not as resource heavy as the Medicaid side, but it is comparable that someone who is, we're trying to avoid an institutional placement, would receive some type of support in their home. The only real program that is comparable to that in the department is the long-term care waiver.
Go ahead. We've got Senator.
So the long-term care waiver, you have to qualify for Medicaid, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, you have to qualify both financially for Medicaid as well as to have a functional medical assessment that would qualify you for nursing home level of care.
And so then let's back, Mr. Chairman, if I may. So back up to this particular program. You said this is a population that, and it was two things. One, they don't qualify for the waiver, and they do not meet the institutional risk test under this particular program, Y-HIES?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, that's a good question. Typically, this population would not qualify or have sought out Medicaid, but there is some overlap of folks that we have through the senior center, or folks that say, hey, you might qualify for this other program. Let's apply you for that. In terms of the functional assessment, this program through Wyoming Home Services, or WICE as we call it, has a different functional assessment than what is approved by CMS on the long-term care waiver. The one on the long-term care waiver we refer to as the LT 101. You probably heard that term. The assessment on the Wyoming Home Services program is referred to as the AGNES. I do not know off the top of my head what that stands for, but it's a different functional assessment that really looks at activities of daily living, bathing, cooking, cleaning, toileting, that kind of thing.
Mr. Chairman.
Did he say Agnes?
And Agnes it's a lesser standard than the LT 101.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, my understanding is that is correct. We would have to get you some follow-up information on the actual functional categories that are within each.
I don't need it.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. So Director Oswald, I thought that there was another program that's out there that similar to the long-term care, but it was maybe a little more comprehensive that was possibly worth considering. Am I mistaken on that? I thought that or is there not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, if there is, I'm not recalling it. I don't believe so.
No, okay. So then if you, Mr. Chairman, if we applied for a waiver, then that would, I would think that some of these issues would be addressed in how we do the means testing.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, devil's in the details on home and
Yeah.
community-based waiver design. You have to select the target population. How do they qualify? What we would be looking for here with the Wyoming Home Services Program is to take a population that may not qualify for nursing home level of care in the Medicaid waiver, but may be close, to put it really crudely, and at risk in the future of institutionalization. We would also look to potentially waive some of the strict Medicaid income requirements on that waiver to essentially develop a lower tier of services that would be similar to Wyoming Home Services, but would generate federal match. That could be a skinnier menu of services that are provided on the waiver. But the idea would be, we have a $5 million program here on a biennial basis. Could we provide similar services to a similar population, draw down federal match and reduce that general fund exposure?
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions. So the first, currently the way I understand it, this money is given to seniors, dispensed to the senior centers who then implement the program. Do we have any sense of what the standards they are applying currently to the recipients? Because I'm not 100% confident I know that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, as Ms. Oswald mentioned, any sort of requirements on, especially on the financial side, are mostly done through self-attestation. And done on a quote sliding fee scale for what the client can afford. I will dig into what our policies and our data show that we have on those clients, but it might be minimal compared to what we have in Medicaid, which is pretty granular.
So then, and then the follow-up is, do we have precedents in waiver programs that would be comparable to something we're talking about to incorporate this?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, in our informal discussions with CMS over the summer and this fall, the answer was yes, probably not exactly what we would be looking for, but again, devil's in the details. But they pointed us in a few directions of state models that have been implemented that we could look at potentially modeling off of. State of Minnesota comes to mind with a similar type of effort that they engaged in several years ago.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Director, so in the WISE program right now, we're serving about 1,900 people a year at a cost of about $1,500 per individual. Is there any way to measure, if we eliminated this program entirely, how much money you'd have to spend in other areas, say for long-term care? What's the return on investment, I guess, of this program? Is there a way to calculate that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, if there is, I hope someone tells me how to do that. It is very, very difficult to kind of prove that dispositive, that if we eliminated a program, how many of those folks would end up in the nursing home. Very difficult to kind of calculate that prospectively without seeing the observed experience. We had a similar issue with the PACE program here in Cheyenne, which was eliminated in the last round of budget reductions. Thankfully, many of those clients were able to transition to the long-term care waiver and continue to receive home and community-based supports in the absence of that program. This would be a little bit different because not all of these clients, like the PACE clients, would qualify for a different program like the Medicaid long-term care waiver. We have done some analysis for this committee, I believe as recently as last year, to look at all of our long-term care settings and what those potential offsets are, especially in Medicaid. It's just very difficult with this program because we don't have a lot of that granular income data.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Just a follow-up. I'm curious as if the of the almost 1,900 people that are served through this program, if we're tracking what the nature of those services are, based on the justification here, how many of those that are receiving these services resulted in a prevention of abuse, neglect, or exploitation? How many of them had homemaking? How many of them had chores? How many of them had respite services, personal emergency response systems, and emergency daycare service or daycare? Are we tracking what's the nature that we're actually spending the money on for each one of those activities? And could we get that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, we do have that, and we will prepare it. Two things. One, we have general performance data on all of the Department of Health programs in our annual health stat book that captures high-level outcomes and finances for all 60 or 70 of the department programs. Ms. Oswald sitting behind me, I'll task her and her staff to get the breakdown of everything that we track through the aging data system for the home services program, and all of those data points that you mentioned, we have information on.
And just to follow up, so I'm assuming that the senior citizens then fill these information out and submit that back to the Department of Health on each one of these aspects of the program?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, not exactly. The information demographically is collected by the provider. So the functional assessment and the enrollment in the sliding scale, the data that they report and essentially invoice us for reimbursement has the service level provision for the types of services you mentioned.
So when you say provider, are you talking about senior centers? Are you talking about independent companies?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's mostly through senior centers, but I think there's some independent providers.
And do the senior center then essentially have a profit component to it? So they charge $25 bucks an hour to go deliver a meal or whatever, and they get.
Mr. Chairman, all of these providers, if my understanding is correct, are nonprofit.
It doesn't mean they don't pay their staff.
Doesn't mean they don't have, you're right, balance sheets where revenue is leveraged. But these are not for-profit entities.
So,
And Mr. Chairman, I might just mention that this is one of those programs from the last session that, again, we had proposed to eliminate. And that decision by the legislature was removed to give us another year, or intended to give us another year of funding. We will eliminate this program July 1st of next year if the funding's not here.
so I guess a couple of different things. Number one, you've had them almost a year. And it sounds like now you said you needed 3 years to figure this out and to stand it up. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, that is fair. We're not at the point of implementing an alternative to this. That is a very different policy directive for the state to essentially expand a program. Now it could work out financially if we were able to make progress and get an approval from CMS on certain design. But it has not been approved. We have not moved in that direction, aside from those informal.
Have we done any type of assessment to figure out the community need and the personal wealth of the individuals being benefited if they could afford it? Whether or not there are community components that would kind of fill in the gaps if this thing walks away. And is it also being advocated? In other words, your providers know that it's a monetary source, so they go out and promote this program so that it's more predicated on the provider transactions than it is on the actual beneficiary of it. I mean, has anyone looked at that just to see what the nuts and bolts of this process is?
Mr. Chairman, on the latter, not so much. On your first question about what would the alternatives be if this were eliminated, and what community supports or programs could be there. It certainly would not be a home service delivery model like this, but clients that are enrolled and receive Wyoming Home Services programming would, in theory and in mass, would qualify for the senior center programs like congregate nutrition and things that are subsidized both by the feds, by the state, and by local dollars. Congregate nutrition, home delivered meals, activities, things like that, but it certainly wouldn't be a one-for-one.
And so finally, then the question is, what if we cut the funding in half? What is that? And then we say, you've got till the next budget cycle to come up with a program that either works but fits within our budget. So that whatever waiver system you had, we don't want it to turn into a growing albatross. But what's your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, if the legislature removed half of the funding from this program, not to be facetious, we would remove half of the funding from this program. So what that would look like is essentially half the population that you see here would not receive the services most likely. I will say there's some variation there because not all of these providers deliver the same menu of services. Most deliver home care, for example, a few don't. Most, maybe with the exception of one, actually, I think all of them do care coordination, so appointment scheduling, transportation to medical appointments, those types of things. But half of the funding being removed would likely result in half the population not being served that you see tabulated here.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
just a kind of a follow-up on that. So how many eligible providers are there in the state of Wyoming would be the first question. And out of those eligible providers, how many participate in the program? And do we see a concentration of where that participation rate is at? Do we have that data?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'll ask Lisa to weigh in.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, currently we have a provider in every county. We, however, except for Albany County, due to the budget cuts and some other issues, we did lose a provider. We send this out to bid every 2 years, I believe. And so right now we have one in every county. I'm not sure how many eligible providers there might be out there. We don't know. It's usually mostly the senior centers that respond to this bid. And we do have a couple of other aging network providers who are not senior centers, but there is one in every county except for Albany. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, no. Because if there's one in every county, I've got at least 5 senior citizen centers in Carbon County. So, and under the scenario that you described, so we got a 20% participation rate by senior centers in Carbon County. That is again a concern to me that there's a concentration in services in that particular county and one municipality, and everybody else is either not being served or is not aware of the program or lacks the capacity to deliver the program. And so I'm a little bit worried about equitable use of the program around the state of Wyoming based on that response.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, just as a add-on to that, as Lisa mentioned, this is essentially RFP'd, and those providers that could meet the criteria of the RFP would be eligible to apply. We can get a breakdown of what that's looked like over the years to see if that, if that has merit, that we do have a lot of providers that are out there that would want to provide the service, but essentially can't because they didn't get the award. My guess would be no, given that it is a little bit of a higher level of care than typical senior center services, given that there's home care provided in the home. So there's CNAs, nurses that potentially need to be involved. But point well taken. We'll do some work and get you some background.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Who's this? Oh, yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm thinking back on some of the discussions and some of the presentations that former Director Forsland had made about the number of folks in Wyoming that do not have forms of retirement. I believe the number was around 100,000. It could be more, it could be less. But those folks are moving through the system without retirement and without the ability to take care of long-term care kinds of situations. And so my question to you is, wouldn't it be proactive for us to consider this and to look at the waivers? Wouldn't it be proactive as a way to stop the real costs in institutions if we were to look at this as a step to kind of keep folks out of that, wouldn't that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kenner, you're right to recall, we did a lot of work when former Director Forsland was here to analyze what we called the aging population of Wyoming and some of the policy and financial issues that we had projected would come with that, largely on the Medicaid side of the house, because admissions into nursing homes, about 60 to 70% of nursing home placements in Wyoming are financed by Medicaid. So the strategy that the department recommended back then and to this day was to focus as much as we can as a state strategically on the provision of home and community-based services. That should be balanced in a program like this to the discussion we're having today of what's the most efficient way to do that. When you have a general fund only program that could, if we get creative on the policy side and get some luck with the feds, could generate some more finances to support more people and thus hopefully keep them out of more expensive institutional placements. That was indeed our strategy or policy strategy that we proposed. On the Medicaid side, Department of Health has been very, very successful since 2014 when the long-term care waiver was uncapped in serving the majority of our long-term care members in Medicaid in home and community-based service settings as opposed to nursing homes because the cost is so much lower and because it's generally the preference of those members. But that doesn't mean we don't need the nursing homes. That's a very important part of the continuum of care. But I think Representative Kenner, that's a delicate balance that on the policy side would be my contention that we need to strike as a state is how do we focus as much as we can on those types of services that avoid institutional placements at higher cost while minimizing, general fund risk and exposure that's there.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's go, Chair.
So just following up on that, this seems to me both your problem and our problem is that this program intuitively saves money. It's hard to come up with the empirical data to support that. But from my perspective, if we look at the long-term waiver, so a senior citizen goes to a skilled nursing facility, I think the average cost per month in Wyoming is now probably between $7,000 and $8,000 a month. Now, you guys don't quite pay that, but you guys are still paying between $6,000 and $7,000, I think, per month, or that's what the rate is. Then if they've got $1,000 of Social Security that offsets some of that, you're still paying $5,000 or $6,000 a month per client per home, and so you put that if you've got 1,800 people, you've got if you could keep 10% of those people from going into a nursing home, that's about a $7 to $9 million savings to the state. We're looking at this. You're providing instead of between $50,000 and $70,000 a year of assistance to a long-term Medicaid waiver, you're looking at $1,500 a year to support people to stay out of their home. So that's the value proposition that we're all looking at, not to mention the quality of life and the other factors that are just as, if not more, are actually more important to the people who receive this benefit. So the thing we're all struggling with is trying to find enough empirical data to support these conclusions. And so anything we can find, that's what we're all looking for, is how do we justify this? How do we at least get to the point where we're all comfortable that our intuitive inclinations on this program are truly justified and it's not just wishful thinking.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
My senior center sent me a document on Wyoming Home Services, and Elizabeth or Donald distributed all to you. And evidently, this answers one question, that the sliding fee scale is standardized by the department. That's the same scale at all providers. And I think Ms. Oswald said that the cost per hour per service, is that standardized by the state or is that determined by each individual center?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, my understanding is that is also standardized.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, and then, so if somebody wants to go on a Medicaid, they go down to the Department of Health or wherever, and you have to supply what, income tax returns or copies of what, how do you verify Medicaid eligibility?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, a couple of things. So a population that would potentially qualify for Medicaid for the long-term care services through the waiver would need a functional assessment done by a public health nurse. That's called the LT 101 to make sure they meet nursing home level of care, and yes, financial eligibility that's done through Social Security Administration connections to the systems and income.
Mr. Chairman, so the information is already available to the department, or do they have to, does the senior who wants to be on Medicaid have to go down and supply documentation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, that has to be supplied. We don't have that already.
Okay. And so the OAA in the senior center prohibits asking anything about income. If I understand it, you can't ask income for the congregate meals or for Meals on Wheels. What else are you prohibited? Because the culture, I know the culture within the senior centers, we don't ask about income. I don't think on anything in a senior center, do you? Except this.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, that's largely right. I believe I'll confirm the language in OAA is that you can ask, but you can't deny because of any standard. It's a bit wonky, but it goes back decades in the federal law. And again, that does not regulate this program. I want to be clear. I just think in practice, it has carried over the years into how these things are assessed.
And one more, Mr. Chairman. So do we have any idea how, if we screened all of these folks going under the state program, if we screened them all for Medicaid eligibility, any idea how much of them actually would be Medicaid eligibility? They've just never known to apply, or do they pretty well figure it out and know when they need to get out of Medicaid that they qualify?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, we did an analysis years ago that looked to match based on demographic information we had the Wyoming Home Service clients with Medicaid. I believe we found something like 15 or 20% overlap, but I want to be very clear and caveat that we don't have the same kind of functional assessments that would be required for Medicaid done by a public health nurse. So it's really, it's more of a finger in the wind estimate than anything else.
Okay, and then Mr. Chairman, I direct you the document that was forwarded to you, the section called client fees.
Yeah, I can see it.
It's interesting.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just one quick follow-up question. Would rural healthcare districts be eligible as a provider for this services? Because in the cases that I'm aware of, very rural Wyoming, we have a couple of these, they perform some of these services, but would they be an eligible provider for these services under this program, or is it strictly just senior centers?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'll let Lisa talk about the specifics if she knows them, or we will follow up. Any provider that would meet the criteria would be eligible to apply to receive the funding to perform those duties. It comes down, we couldn't award to every provider because the budget would be limited. If that makes sense, it would be a pretty thin spread at that point. But Lisa, do you know about rural healthcare districts?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm not sure. We only allow one provider per county due to, it would really be difficult if we disperse the funds more than that, because it would just be difficult to administer the program. Wouldn't be enough to go around, basically. And in regard to Carbon County, the senior center actually is one of the few places that does not have Wyoming Home Services. It is the hospital. So that's probably why it's not in the 5 senior centers there in Carbon County. I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you, but that raises some concern. Hospital district and then a rural healthcare district. And whether the hospital's now saying, you guys take care of it, and we're going to spend that money elsewhere. I'm really worried about equitable distribution and opportunity to participate if this program should move forward.
Okay, further questions? Well, that was a fun one. We got something fun to wake us up after lunch. All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you'll turn to page 297, this is another, we don't have to spend much time here. This is another one of those state matching requirements for the Older American Act ARPA funds that have been recommended denied by the governor, and we will update the committee if anything changes at the congressional level.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chairman, the next exception request, I'll hand over to Eric. These, I believe it's administrative in nature.
Yes, on page 297, the bottom. This is another one. You'll see plenty of these from the Older American Act. It will remove a B11. So it's all federal funds that we're asking to get into the standard budget.
Okay, move on.
Now we're on page 300, unit 5003, and there's 2 exception requests in this unit. The first one is on page 301. It's identical to the one that I just talked about. We'll see, I think, 2 more of these that removes the B11 that we have to do to get the federal funds in the budget.
Mr. Chairman, the next one on page 302, again, Older Americans Act, ARPA dollars, state matching requirements. We're holding until we see something change at the federal level.
Okay,
Page 304, unit 5004, Title 7 elder rights. There are 2 on page 305.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, page 305, another Older Americans Act, state matching requirements for the ARPA funds.
okay,
And then top of page 306 is another B11 removal, Older Americans Act federal funds we're requesting. Page 308, 5005, senior volunteer service program. There's no exception request in that unit.
okay. Any questions? Move along.
Page 311, unit 5007, Wyoming Senior Services Board. There's no exception request in this unit. Next is on page 313, unit 5010, healthcare licensing and surveys. No exception requests in this unit.
Any questions?
Next is on page 317, unit 5040. It's the Pioneer Home. There is,
I'm going back to 311 and the Wyoming Senior Services Board. It's funding provided to senior centers for older adults. It looks to me like some of that's crossover from the program we just talked about.
Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming Senior Services Board funding is basically a block grant to the Senior Services Board to allocate as support to the senior centers. It does cross-pollinate on a lot of different areas. That funding, both statutorily and in our budget, we give to the Senior Services Board, they allocate.
So my point is that when we do any type of an analysis or review of the program, that we just had the long discussion over, we need to know what other sources are out there to cover those costs or provide some of those benefits. This is an example of them, in addition to the senior, districts. All of those things have components to it. So unless we can see the whole basket of goods, we're going to be wrapped up in the emotional content of it instead of deciding what's actually there and what's not there. So, it's a pretty big basket to cover. But we can't make good decisions, and nor can you without looking at everything. Am I right?
Mr. Chairman, I will agree with you. I think in times of fiscal constraint, when we're having to make cuts or having to have discussions like this about funding programs into the future, those sources should be looked at. A grant program or a block grant like this in what it could provide or how it could be targeted is a discussion we would welcome with legislative support.
Yeah, in some ways, a block grant is maybe more preferable because you hit senior centers and it's not just one entity within one community that goes out and provides the service, but it's everyone that's out there that they just look for the people that are most needy to take care of. So I don't know. All right, please proceed.
Page 317, unit 5040 is the Pioneer Home. There are no exception requests in this unit.
No more questions? Go along.
Page 322, unit 5050. This is the Veterans Home, and there are 2 exception requests in this unit. The first, actually, you'll take the first one.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, page 324, bottom of page 324 is our staffing request for the new Veterans Home Skilled Nursing Facility. As I mentioned earlier this morning, that was planned for completion in July of next year. We are needing to staff that facility up. We are leveraging some of the staff, like the administrator position we have for the domiciliary side, the assisted living facility side of the current veterans home. But given the level of care at a nursing home as compared to a domiciliary or an assisted living facility, we do need additional staffing. As I mentioned this morning, this facility is designed to be revenue neutral or cash flow positive in out years. And so this would not be a long-term general fund exposure. And as Director Hibbard mentioned earlier, you'll see language in the budget throughout our budget that the governor has recommended, if possible, we can use reversion carry forward authority before using this $5 million recommended general fund appropriation, if we have them and if it's prudent to do so as we open that facility next summer.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, are you far enough along in the employment process to make an assessment about the ability to attract the folks? There's been concern in that area about that. And so I'm just a little update there, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kenner, it will be a challenge to staff the facility in Buffalo as it is at our facility in Evanston, Lander, Basin, Thermopolis. I'm optimistic that we can do that. To your first question, we have not begun the recruiting process for that because we don't have the positions to do that yet. That's what this request is. If this were approved, it would be beneficial, although not necessarily required, to have the positions and funding effective immediately so that we could begin that, even though the individuals wouldn't start until the facility was open. Getting started on that recruitment would be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Larson.
Eric, on that amount, that request budget code, you've got 5148,724. Should that on pages 27 and 28, should those amounts equal the same? So at the bottom of your exception request, where we have the 4975,651, is that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, the next exception request is to eliminate some HR consolidation so that.
Oh, that's right.
Those numbers won't be the same.
We pulled them out. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
No further questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So back on the staffing issue, I mean, just a little bit broader, it's a broader question than just the skilled nurse facility, the veteran home, but it's just another one. You run the state runs a number of facilities that require significant nursing faculty or staff to run. And as we've watched the nursing shortage only increase over shortage, and everybody's had to go to these traveling nurse programs traveling nurses that we pay substantially more than we pay local. So anyway, as you look through all that, I mean, so not just necessarily with respect to the skilled nurse facility, but just the state facilities as a whole. How do you see that shaking out? How do we solve that problem where ultimately it doesn't take takes a lot of dedication, but not a lot of brain power to watch a traveling nurse come in and have better hours, get substantially more pay, and then on to the next job, as opposed to the person who's there coming in every making every shift and doing that work on a consistent basis. How do we approach that problem as a state?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Perkins, that is a tough problem to solve. $1 trillion would go a long way to statewide, not just our facilities, but others to, pay. Microeconomics will tell you we'll pay them more, and the demand for those positions will be there, and you'll see the labor force. That's easier said than done. I think compensation, as we discussed this morning, for the state facilities is part of the equation. You'll see, I believe, in the data that A&I provided you that for the most part, our positions on average across the department are around 80 to 85% of what the 2020 market would be. So not in a dire place low, but pretty low, relatively speaking. But like I said, compensation is only a portion of it. The other things that we try to do at our state facilities is, given that the market rate for traveling nurses agency labor, especially over the course of the pandemic, exploded. It has stabilized, which I'm happy to say. It's still high, but not as high as it was. We try to grow our own at our facilities. So we have CNA apprenticeship programs. We have programs where we will give a CNA educational leave, for example, to get their nursing degree, where we essentially give them time off during the week to go to school to become a nurse, and they sign a contract with us if they complete that. That based on that time off, they will work 3 to 5 years with our facility. It's a really tough problem to solve, and I don't think we're unique as state facilities that in dealing with it, but we also do, I will say we're unique in the sense that most of our facilities are safety net and very specialty populations, psychiatric populations, intellectual and developmental disability populations at Lander, safety net clients at the Basin Retirement Home that private sector either can't or won't accept, and certainly the veterans in Buffalo. I don't have a great answer other than those two things of compensation and trying the best we can in Wyoming and in our state facilities too, to grow our own labor and help them understand that it is beneficial to work for the state. A lot of folks of my generation and below don't see the benefit of our health insurance or retirement packages. We try to market that to them, that our rates might not be as high as what you could make as a traveler in a different state or a different facility, but the benefits add up over time. But honestly, Co-Chairman Perkins, it's not a problem with one singular answer.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
so if you can't fill these positions with full-time people by the time you open, do you need to have authorization for AWACS, or you just B11 the AWACS?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, that's a good question. We do have AWAC positions at the facilities, but mostly what we do when we can't fill a permanent position is use our 900 series if available to contract, as you know, or we will also leverage temporary position slots to try to get folks in when we're at critically low levels or facing compliance issues. To the extent that, and we've worked and had good conversations with ANI on what flexibility could be there at our state facilities in terms of recruitment, but where we would be served best is to fill our permanent positions, and pie in the sky in an ideal fashion, we would want to keep our permanent positions because our census at our facilities does not fluctuate to the extent that other facilities in the private sector might see. For example, our state hospital operates a consistent waiting list. Our Life Resource Center, the demand for those beds in the new nursing home will be there. I don't envision a time at those safety net facilities that we wouldn't have the demand from courts, communities, what have you, for placement, that we would be having units offline. To that end, what I was mentioning about our permanent positions is very true, but we struggle, especially on the nursing side, to always fill them. And again, would welcome the recommendation for the compensation package from ANI and the governor, especially for our nurses and CNAs, as that could go a long way to help us.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, page 325, the middle of the page is the HR consolidation at the Veterans Home. Next page is 333. That's unit 5060, the retirement center. There's only one request here, and it is also HR consolidation.
On page 335.
Yes, page 335, sorry. Yes.
Go ahead.
And that
Mr. Chairman,
completes.
that completes our budget. Eric and I will stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Cookies and donuts, sir. Next one. Go ahead.
well, you recall the work you did on, the committee did on the Pioneer Home and the Retirement Center, and where are we on those? We were trying to get them at least to break even. Just an update on there would be nice.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, the retirement center in Basin still operates break even. We do have some concern, although you didn't see a request for it this biennium, that mostly due to the pandemic and some of our staffing shortages. We have burned a little more of our revenue account there in recent, over the last year or so, but hopefully that we can replenish that with increased census at the
Does it
facility.
remain basically fully occupied?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in general, we did have a number of deaths related to the pandemic earlier this fall, tragically, but we're optimistic that the census will, our folks working now, and we have a new administrator at the facility that is working diligently to get the census up. In terms of the Pioneer Home, the direction to make that break even is difficult. It's not a formal direction that we have. It comes down to two things. Number one, if we want to make that facility break even, we need to market that facility to the state, to the country, to attract wealthier individuals that could pay higher private pay rates. Alternatively, if the mission of this assisted living facility was to be a safety net facility and take more Medicaid, which we have done, we've improved the Medicaid reimbursements on the balance sheet. But again, that Medicaid doesn't cover the full cost of care. So the more you do that, the more that you kind of reinforce or reify the state subsidy that's required. So there's really two missions that are at odds with each other with that facility. In order to get it to break even, we would kind of need to choose the former, but it really would be a policy decision for the state on what the role of the Pioneer Home is. I will mention, not to be defensive, but over the years, as we've talked about various options to divest or privatize, that does cause us to struggle to recruit staff and fill the census because of the uncertainty of the facility's future. I'm proud of the work that the Pioneer Home has done to increase its Medicaid reimbursement. Just to clarify, if you do look at that in the budget book, you'll think I'm lying because you won't see it. At the Pioneer Home, we don't have an enterprise revenue account like we do at the retirement center in Basin. So that revenue that we get books directly back to the general fund. The total budget that you see for the Pioneer Home on the general fund side is a little bit less given that biennial Medicaid revenue that we collect, but it goes right back to the Treasury and general fund. So we'd be happy, Senator Kinski, to provide you where we are on those lines.
So I'm looking at 320 and it shows the expense. So if you could just match, say, the last 7 years of expense versus the last 7 years of revenue, just see if we're closing the gap.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Kinski, it has closed slightly, but I will be honest that it's not close to break even.
Go ahead.
Director Johansson, when we were going through the legislative task force and the governor's task force looking at those facilities, my recollection of that was, and the question that's out there is it the state's role to provide assisted living, subsidize assisted living to the citizens of the state of Wyoming? And we find that that really serves one population. They don't really come from around the state per se. And my recollection, so at one point we were going to privatize that facility. That failed. That effort failed. But as a result of that, I thought we were moving to be more aggressive to make that self-sustaining. And so if you have done some, first question is, have you increased the rates to the residents there, and by what percentage over that period of time? And is there plans to raise them anymore?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, first answer to your question is yes, that those efforts have been undertaken. Every year we raise the private pay rates at the Pioneer Home. We can get you the breakdown of how they've been raised over the past 4 or 5 years since the facilities task force looked at that. I don't have that data right in front of me, but that in addition to essentially enrolling more of those clients in the assisted living facility in Medicaid to get some offset there has been ongoing for the past 3 or 4 years.
Well, what's the success rate of it? What do we say? The budget's 4.7 million. How much do we collect?
Mr. Chairman, Eric and I will get those exact figures for you following this meeting of what the true state subsidy is right now. But if memory serves, the budget is just a hair over $4 million a biennium. And I believe our general fund subsidy over that biennium is just a little bit over 3. So through those efforts, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, we're approaching about $1 million of savings from increased rates and additional Medicaid revenue. Keep in mind,
that must be statutory, but it seems to me that we ought to have those funds it collects show up in this budget and be used for the facility versus going to the general fund. So we can monitor it and control it and have a better idea of what's transpiring. So that would be a statutory change. I think.
Mr. Chairman, I believe a revenue account like that would need legislative approval, and we would welcome it one way or the other. You know, the money goes back right now to the general fund. You don't see a consistent need for us to make exception requests of the Pioneer Home. But to monitor it, like the retirement center, have a revenue account that can be spent on, you know, things like increasing our census or marketing or what have you. If that's the state's direction for us to go, we could do it one way or the other.
And for example, can you mandate that they're Medicaid or Medicare eligible before they are admitted?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. We could in theory, but keep in mind that would then negate our ability to be break even because Medicaid does not cover the full cost of assisted living care. They only cover basically supplemental services.
So do you have clients that pay more than that, right?
Mr. Chairman, we have private pay clients that pay the current Pioneer Home full freight, and then we have clients that don't and also receive Medicaid subsidization.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question in your behavioral health on the preschools. Who would be the best person within your agency? I have a series of questions that don't need answered today. So who would be the best person within your group to contact with to get a little more information?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, you can contact me directly.
Oh, okay. I'll do it.
Senator
So, at the Pioneer Home, the screening for whether they're Medicaid or Medicare eligible, does it apply to everybody? Or if you just say, well, no, you make too much money, we won't have you fill out a Medicaid application, but we do need to means test you. What do they do? What do they ask for? Or is that self-reported like the YHI's program?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, I don't know off the top of my head. I'll look to see if Lisa does know that practice.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, we encourage every resident to apply for Medicaid. I don't think, we've had a few that would not, but we really encourage it. And then we use that money or we use that information to help determine how much they can pay if they don't qualify for Medicaid.
And if they don't qualify for Medicaid, they pay the full
They
rate?
either pay the full rate or based on whatever information we have, they can be on part of the sliding scale.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like almost like it's self-assessment on the income for the sliding fee scale.
Well, except for we have the information. If they apply for Medicaid, we have their financial information. I think there were a few residents, however, that did not, basically refused to apply for Medicaid, but that is we really encourage it. And I think we've had a lot of success in getting them to apply. So if they don't qualify for Medicaid, we use that information to determine how much they can pay.
So Stefan, when we present this on the floor and the costs, it's a $4.7 million biennial budget. I think you said that you collect roughly 3 million or one.
We'll
So
get
it's
you.
cost us 3.5.
We'll get you that breakdown, Mr. Chairman. I might be low on my estimate. It could be more than that on the general fund subsidy.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
thank you. So you piqued my interest when you talked about a marketing campaign. Have you done that in other instances for even Basin? And do you have any idea what it would look like?
Mr. Chairman, no. Representative Schwartz, we have not typically done marketing campaigns for any of our facilities. One of the reasons for that is Representative Larson was referring to when the facilities task force looked at this, the question was really what's the role of the state? And with assisted living services and general nursing home services that aren't safety net for safety net populations, I think the sentiment was we shouldn't be competing with the private sector. That's really the spirit of my comments is what's our mission at the Pioneer Home? And if we were, we could increase our revenue collection and offset general funds if we marketed the hell out of that facility. But we would in essence be competing with the private sector to attract people to a state facility so that we don't have to subsidize it. We're happy to move in that direction if it's the will of the legislature. But for the time being, we have taken a more piecemeal approach to increase our Medicaid revenue, increase our client fees to offset some of those costs.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. I'll just stop. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? So, I mean, we're really putting this facility between a rock and a hard place. When you want to break even, I mean, in the private sector, those folks that accept Medicaid patients have to be incredibly careful, because if they screw up the mix and have too many Medicaid patients, they will go bankrupt. By definition, they're not reimbursed for the cost of the service they provide. So they have to prepare, they have to do that very, very carefully. And so that's one issue that these folks have to deal with. Second issue is I can tell you that in advising folks on retirement issues, my advice to them is never apply for Medicaid until you know you qualify. Because the application for applying for Medicaid, if you do it early when you don't qualify, you can actually disqualify yourself for a period of time much longer than you otherwise might be eligible to apply. So there's while it's very advantageous to the state, it's not necessarily advantageous to the individual to qualify to apply for Medicaid upon entering a skilled nurse facility or assisted living facility. And the third issue that we just have to be cognizant of is that if I'm a private pay, I don't know what the full rate is at the Pioneer home, but it's probably $8,000 or $9,000 a month, I would guess.
It's lower.
So the lower than it, well, excuse me, because it is assisted living. But if you're a private pay, you have your choice of, the world is your oyster if you can private pay, and there's many facilities that do not take Medicare, provide amenities that just can't be provided by folks that do provide Medicaid services. And so again, when we talk about, you may be able to get to the point where you might be able to break even on operational costs, just the variable costs of providing that facility. You're never gonna, if it's going to be any kind of a safety net, you're never going to get these folks to the place where they're going to be able to pay for themselves. They might be able to, like I say, you might get them break even on variable costs. They're never going to cover their fixed costs. They're never able to cover their facility costs. It's just, it's not in the business model. It's not in the cards. So again, one of these days, we're going to have to make a hard policy decision about what we do with the Pioneer home. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman and Co-Chairman Perkins, I would agree. I also would like to say on the record, it is a wonderful facility with a great leadership team and staff who are dedicated to those residents. And if you haven't been there, it is a very, very nice assisted living facility on a state park near the hot springs, and they do a great job.
So, Mr. Chairman, my wife's grandmother grew up or lived in Thermopolis, and the day that she was eligible, she packed up and moved from her home to the Pioneer home and left her husband in the trailer watching baseball because he didn't believe that she would go. Well, and he was there within the next 3 weeks. It is a wonderful facility. They take great care of their patients. If you're inclined to, if you're able to move and use that as a facility, it's in a great environment. It's the Gotcha Rehab is right next door. The state pool is right across the way. In a park-like setting, it is an amazing facility, and it's run well. Been there many times.
Mr. Chairman, so Director Johansson, isn't it fair to say that we are currently competing with the private sector?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, in a sense, yes. I think that's fair to say. But we don't go above and beyond, with that competition, trying to market, et cetera.
It's got pretty good word of mouth advertising right here.
From some people in the legislature, it does.
Well, and I think, I agree with Chairman Perkins, and it's the same question we've had for the last 8 years is, should the state be in the assisted living facility business, or can that be taken care of in the private sector? And I think through the task force, we determined that it could certainly be provided for in the private sector. We even had interest, as I recall, in that facility from the private sector. We just legislatively couldn't let go of it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's right. And until the time comes that happens, we will operate that facility in the best way we can with the best staff and the best patient care that we have. So it is a going concern for the Department of Health and not something we're looking to change.
Well, we appreciate that, Stephen, but I think the directive from the legislature, our intent was it needs to change. And that's the reason why we ask you to raise prices on it, to actually bring it up to competitive market, close to what the private market pays. Because in fact, it has turned into a Hot Springs County retirement home. And I mean, it's a lovely place. And I remember there having these discussions and having some nice vociferous discussions with all the local community. And that's what stopped us. We weren't doing the right thing. We were doing the emotional thing. And so we couldn't pull the trigger. So we're finding another way to get there in a more subtle and perhaps a more compassionate way to get there. But we need to get there. And I think that was kind of our directive last time we had this discussion.
Mr. Chairman, fair point, and that directive was taken seriously. We've made those strides. Well, we'll provide you all the data on what that has resulted in.
Okay. On that wonderful, happy note.
Amen.
Anything else? Thank you. Nice job. 340 pages was nothing. We expect 450 next time.
Hey, that's my correction. That's my correction. He was kidding.
Yeah, let's take a quick 5-minute break and then retirement won't take very long.
We had to have
That was gonna be.
Okay, we are back. All right, welcome. We've got the retirement folks. Mike is here. Dave, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Swindell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. I'd like to introduce the staff that I have in attendance today, and then I'll turn the floor over to our Board Chairman, Tom Chapman, who is on Zoom and has some introductory remarks. To my left is our Chief Investment Officer, Sam Masudi. To my right is Deputy Director Mike Bleakley. And in the rear in the Overwatch position is General Counsel Ben Brandis. Mr. Chapman, the Zoom is yours.
Tom, I get to see you on video fairly frequently these last month or two.
Yeah, no, it's been good. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Chapman. I'm Chair of the Wyoming Retirement System. I appreciate the speed that you all are going through these budget hearings, so I will be very brief. Overall, the system's in good shape. As Dave will talk about, our funding ratio is in the upper 70s. Your support towards building a better investment program has really paid off. As some of you have heard from other committee meetings, our 3-year returns as of September 30th were up in the 4th percentile, which is a huge improvement from being down in the 74th percentile. Our 5-year returns, which were in the bottom quartile, are now up in towards the top quartile. Why has this happened? Well, again, thanks to Dave and Sam and the team, but we've had a stable staff, and that's really been incredibly important. It's also built up a great team culture. And so if you think about it roughly, this improved performance from going from a bottom quartile to a top quartile performance has been adding about $250 million a year for the last 3 years. So that's been really great. The other good thing I want to talk about is the improvement in terms of our board members. And I certainly say that over myself, that we now have 4 new board members, 2 of them with significant investment and finance backgrounds, as we've heard from you all. And so we really feel that we have a very strong board. I'll give you a couple concerns that I have. You know, the number 1 priority for the Wyoming retirement system is service. As Dave will talk about, the ANI study of why people come and work for the state of Wyoming is for pension. We've had about a 50% turnover in our staffing over the last few years, but we've been very fortunate that we have staffing that likes to take up the challenge and move up to the next level. But we, like other agencies, are getting very strained. I guess, Mr. Chair, one of the analogies I heard a couple weeks ago in Cheyenne was we feel like we're walking a balance beam, but with sort of the staffing elements now, we feel like we're walking a bit of a tightrope, which means that we have very little room for error. Why is this so important? I think you all have heard this over the years, certainly, that retirement benefits, as I said, are why people want to come work for the state. But really, 1 out of every 6 citizens in the state of Wyoming are part of this system, and $750 million a year are paid out in benefits. 80% of that staying in the state. So we really do need to keep this service. You know, we've got to keep it the way it is, if not better. And then, as Dave will talk about, we're also a little bit concerned with our accounting and compliance elements, which is something that we can't, frankly, be shortchanged on. And so these are just some of the areas I'm highlighting. Dave's going to get into more details, but again, I really appreciate everybody's time to hear us. So thanks. So Dave, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Dave, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, any questions from you or the committee of Mr. Chapman?
You getting any snow over there?
Yeah, we got a bunch last night. In fact, they're going to open up 3/4 of the mountain on Saturday. So people are excited. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I can top that good news. Don, I'd like to call up those 6 slides that we had submitted as part of the board material. And you or Mary do that?
Slideshow time.
Hi, Karen. I won't spend a lot of time on these. We will get to the heart of the budget, but I think it will describe some issues for you that I think the committee should be aware of, and you'll find these helpful. That is exactly what we're looking for. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I apologize for the delay, but this is some good information. I think the committee is well aware of the governor's proposal on compensation. And the State Department of Administration put a report out on compensation facts. And part of that report gave you some results of a survey that was taken amongst state employees. I believe more than 4,000 state employees, about 52% of the workforce responded on this survey. And there were two highlights that were in that report.
Dave, I'm curious, are you the one that put in the green highlight?
Oh, that is absolutely my doing. Well, we actually went through, should we make this formal or informal? Just made it informal. But the question, of course, was, why did you choose to work for the state of Wyoming? And you can see that our retirement benefits rated #1. If we go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, who did you ask the question?
This question was asked of all state employees with a response of more than 4,500, 52% of the state workforce.
Did you ask leading questions?
It was not my survey. I just got the report just like you did, but I noticed this response. Slide before, you're one ahead of me. Hey, what keeps you from working? Now, in HR, it's all about recruiting, and it's also about retention. What keeps you working for the state of Wyoming? Retirement is #1, and this one by a large margin, 55% to 44% of the next response. Now, this is of state employees, but surveys like this are routinely run in other entities. You will see similar results in K through 12, in your counties, in your cities. This is similar to national surveys. Sometimes health insurance will rate #1, but retirement always rates highly. So my point to you is that amongst your state workforce and really amongst your public workforce in Wyoming, retirement's very, very important, both for recruiting and for retention. Now the next slide. The retirement system has a substantial economic impact, not only to retirees, obviously, they benefit from the benefits. But last year, we put out more than $707 million, and 79% of that stayed in Wyoming. And the county breakout is, as you've shown here, 557 million going to Wyoming zip codes. In some places, this amounts to a fairly substantial payroll and is a substantial percentage of county income. I grew up in Riverton, that's in Fremont County, and that 45 million that went to Fremont County last year represents more than 3% of county income. It makes the retirement system one of the bigger payrolls in that county. And so this has a significant impact not only for retirees, but for Main Street, because retirees will spend their money. And so this is an important stabilizer to the state. And it's important to note, and I always make a note of this, is that 70% of this money is earned in investment earnings. Sam's investment team provides 70% of ultimately what pays for a pension. Only 30% comes from contributions from either the employee or the employer. Let's talk about some investment results, and that's on the next slide. This gets to some points that Tom Chapman was talking about. I apologize to Representative Schwartz, who is one of our legislative liaisons who saw this at the board meeting. I apologize a little bit to everyone who's on the Capital and Finance Committee because there's a substantial overlap with this committee and that membership. You saw that at the CapFin meeting. So Representative Schwartz, this is the third time you've seen this slide, but I'm so proud of it. Because
Go ahead.
Can we see if he learned anything the first two times?
Have him present.
It's a little unusual because at some point there's always some red on the chart. But what this shows you is how our fund performance has been against our strategic benchmark, against our peers, against our reference portfolio, and our 7% actuarial target over multiple time periods, quarter to date, year to date, 1 year, 2 year, 3 to 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. It's green across the board. We've beaten all those benchmarks. The year to date, this is as of September 30th, we were up 12.77%. And I call the attention to the 3 and 5 year numbers that are kind of highlighted there. That kind of represents the years that Sam's team kind of is held responsible for because the team wasn't fully in place before that. And you can see in particular the peer ranking over the 3 years, we ranked in the 4th percentile. I mean, virtually we beat 96 out of 100. The peer ranking here is of funds. I think there's 80 funds that are in that peer ranking, all with public funds with assets over $1 billion. So that's the peer set. We beat 96% of them. And you can see how much it's improved. Look at the 10-year rate. It's 49. That's middle of the pack. And our 5-year rating is 26. That's near top quarter. So how do you go top quarter 5 years and then kind of middling 10 years? That means really, if you go back 5 years, you were in the bottom quarter, right? Yeah, that's exactly where we were. And it's with this committee's support to build out the investment team, provide the positions, and do everything that we've done that has resulted in these kind of performance. And you're going to see some impact on this in funding levels. Next slide. This is a little small to read. We can blow it up. The backup slides have this bigger, but these are actually last year's numbers. They're about a year old. This is as of 1 January 2021. And we're about to cross over where these numbers are a year old. But we were at 75% in the public employee plan. It will get to 100% in about 25 years. And you can see the other plans are all on track. They're all headed in the right direction. I know this committee is somewhat suspicious of all projections, and that suspicion is well-founded. But direction is important. It's probably more important than any exact numbers or any of these exact percentages. You want to know where you're at, but it's direction that's most important. You can be at 50% funded, but if you're heading in the right direction, you're good. You can be 100% funded, but if you're heading in the wrong direction, you got a problem. So direction is the most important. And I think all of these numbers are going to tick up here about 3 or 4 percentage points if we hold on to some of the double-digit returns we've got so far. And that's the reason is because all of this is based upon a 5-year smoothing. And so we don't get too excited about a good year. But we've had enough good years back to back and hopefully to back that the actuarial smoothing will also show some positive results. And you'll see the long-term projections also move by quite a bit. Maybe 3% for the 1 year status, maybe as much as 9 or 10% when you look out 20 or 30 years. That can disappear on you the same way, but it's going to be a good year and you'll see these things head in the right direction. And it's because we've been doing well enough, often enough, long enough that we're starting to see some good results.
Go ahead.
So currently 2021 the big plan 74.8. Where does that rank amongst peer plans?
Amongst 125 peer plans that are tracked by the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, this would put you pretty much middle of the pack. And that's pretty typical. Wyoming's retirement funding and its status has been very typical over the last decade, really. Most pension plans have been kind of stuck in the mid-70s. And it's because we're all moving the goalposts. As soon as we get a little healthier, we reduce our assumed rate of return, we adopt new mortality tables, and so on.
So Dave, I think it might be worthwhile explaining though. 8 years ago, we were on a downward trend for a little bit.
That's correct. Direction's most important, and the reforms that were instituted. There's the same medicine across all these plans that I'm talking about. We all reduced our COLAs. We all increased contributions, and many of us, reduced benefits. That's where Tier 2 came from in the public employee plan. And those are starting to have some traction, and you'll start to see it this year. But like most plans, it's like, hey, we're still stuck. But you started to see that break out even this summer. 2/3 of the pension systems in the United States have a 30 June year end, and they do their actuarial studies on 30 June basis. And those results started to become apparent this September. And suddenly you started to see several percentage points improvement. And I think you'll see the same thing here on a 31 December year end. On a market value basis, the retirement fund, the big public employment plan is almost 80% funded. That was just on a market snapshot. We smoothed that over 5 years. But if you keep doing well enough, eventually the actuarial results, are equivalent to the market results. And I think you'll start to see that. We only have one bad year in the 5-year smoothing at this point. That was 2018. We had a loss that year. That can't happen. So my point to you is, in general, your retirement system is healthy. Our investment results have been good. I'm very appreciative of the support of this committee. And so the state of the agency is good. There are some issues, however, and that gives rise to some budgetary requests that are contained in this budget. Last slide. Mr. Chairman, if you look at our budget, you'll find there's actually 13 exception requests. A couple of these are routine. One of them is a shift from one unit to another. It's an in and an out. There's a couple of adjustments to these legacy highway patrol and game and fish ad hoc things that just get adjusted. And then there's kind of the normal request of zero-based budgeting and information technology that all has to, always comes back as an exception request, and so on and so forth. There are 4 key exception requests to address certain issues with service in the retirement system. The first one is actually kind of not new. That's a request for $1.2 million, almost $1.3 million in programming dollars to continue to improve and build out the pension administration system, which we nicknamed, it's the Retirement Administration and Information Network, or we call it RAIN. This is the system that really runs the whole pension administration for retirees. It's how you apply for retirement, so it pays the money out, so it keeps track of everything. We have recently completed, with your help last year, last budget, you approved, I think, $1.1 million for this. And we achieved a major rewrite of the entire program to change its architecture. Today, we just launched this on 1 November. It's kind of in the cloud. To get to the whole program is now located also next to the database behind the ETS firewall. And so the program is no longer on someone's desktop computer. And so the program and the database are together. They're both behind the ETS firewall. They're additionally behind Microsoft's Azure cloud firewall. And even if you breach both of those firewalls, you would find that it's encrypted for the first time. So this is a significant security and enhancement. And it also sets the stage for certain other improvements, which we now want to proceed with your support. We have 2-factor authentication to establish your retirement account and use the member portal, but we don't have 2-factor authentication to initiate further transactions on that portal. Like if you want to change your bank account, you want to change your address, things like that, that should also require 2-factor authentication. We got to build that. We have the opportunity to receive additional efficiencies by receiving payments electronically from our local employers. But we've got to make it easy for them. It's got to be on our portal. You press a button and they pay their bill to us out of a prearranged bank account. I've got to make this simple for our small employers, the rural fire departments, the sewer districts, the smaller cities, and so on, smaller school districts. The big folks pay us electronically already. We're got to get this down to the smaller folks. And we've got to address certain service issues. Right now, the typical retiree, it takes about 60 days to start their payment. That's because we have to wait on getting the final contributions from the payroll department in the local school district or wherever. And so what happens is if you were going to, a lot of state employees, for example, will retire early in the month. They want to stay on one more month on the health insurance. So the retirement date might be on the 1st or 2nd of December. Their November contributions will get to us by 12 December, but those December contributions won't get to us until 12 January. And so the earliest they can retire is going to be at the end of January for a retirement that actually began on 3 September or 3 December. That's pretty typical. And if there's any mistakes in that payroll, then it can go another 30 days. Best in class systems don't operate that way. Instead, the standard these days is you've been working for this system for 25 years. We've got 24 months and 24 years and 11 months worth of data. Why don't we give you an estimated payment within 30 days? And then if something else comes in, we'll recalibrate the thing on the second check, right? That's best in class service. But to do that requires substantial programming. We can't do it right now because you would essentially have to do a manual calibration and touch every retirement twice. And we don't have the ability to do that. But with the proper programming, we could. And so that's what that kind of budget would support. It supports it's a blanket for a number of hours of programming. The hourly rate, Mike, is what, $200, I think. Anyway, ETS said that's a really great rate for what you're getting. So anyway, that's that one. And then the others are positions. Oh, by the way, the governor recommends approval of the ETS, this appropriation for that. And the others are 3 positions. I asked for an additional accountant. I asked for an additional member benefit specialist in member benefits. And I asked for another investment analyst for Sam's investment team. The governor approved and was recommending approval.
When was the last time you added personnel?
That we added personnel. This committee added 1 personnel in the last budget to convert a temporary part-time worker into a state employee.
When was the last time we added a full-time personnel?
That would be in the budget before that was in the investment team when we were building it out.
Good. Go ahead.
The governors did not recommend the accountant and also deferred on the investment analyst. He is recommending the additional member benefit specialist.
If you had to have one of the 2, which would you pick?
My recommendation to the governor, my number 1 priority of those 3 positions was the accountant.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason for that is because it is something that those of us involved with governance need to be concerned about key person risk. Before we get into all the exceptions, I know we need to get through the budget, but I would take the committee back to 2018 and I'll tell you a little story. The year is 2018. The pension fund has about $8 billion under management. We're producing comprehensive annual financial reports that are incorporated in every entity in the state of Wyoming, every school district, including also the state of Wyoming. With new accounting standards that came out, they now have to take certain pension entries and put on the face of their financial statements. We have a new investment team that has been enlarged, but has no administrator. There's no back office, no middle office support, no one doing investment accounting. It's all just investment professionals. There's a 2-person finance team with a finance manager and a clerk. There is no one with a CPA license. So think about that. You have an $8 billion pension fund and there's no certified public accountants on the staff. That's where we were. So what Ruth and I did, one of Ruth's last acts, but I was a co-conspirator. We had a vacancy develop on the investment team. One of the analysts was hired away by the University of Wyoming Foundation. And rather than replace that investment analyst with another analyst, we converted that position to an investment accountant. And that was the first back office staff that Sam had. That cost us an analyst position, but gained an investment accountant on the investment team to reconcile all the manager accounts and to validate their performance. And I think, Sam, I think you would concur, this was the best use, and we were very glad we did that. It did cost us an investment analyst, and that other request is simply to replace that, to get back to where we were on the investment status, because we're pretty thin. And if we lose some, we're fine as long as everybody stays, but these are younger people and one of them will leave. At some point, we're going to be down an analyst, and that'll be painful for the investment team. But getting back to the accountant, so that's the first thing we did. Shu Ye was the first certified public accountant on staff, and she was in the investment team. And then what we decided that when the incumbent retired, we would seek to upgrade the position and require a CPA license in the finance manager position. That person did retire. We did get it reclassified, and we hired an experienced certified public accountant to lead the finance team. That was the first CPA we've had in the finance team. And so we've made a lot of progress. However, there is still key person risk. If we were to lose our finance manager, as we did before, that was a near-death experience in putting out the 2019 financial statements. I don't want to go through that again. We're still exposed to operational risk that way, and you don't have the proper two-person control with one person. You just don't. We were also in possession of a letter that's in our financial statements from our external auditor that noted that they had to correct 2 errors from the custody bank that should have been caught by management. They rated it as a significant deficiency and brought that to the attention of management. We've instituted certain procedures at the custody bank to make their reports double check before they come to us. We've allowed 1 more week in the preparation of the financial statements, cutting the auditor's time, but hopefully there'll be a better product. But in the end, I promised them that we would seek an additional accountant, which they highly recommend, so we can have proper two-person control, and there can be some sort of stability in that office, because it's very key. Because nobody else understands this, that would be my highest priority. The governor understood that, but he felt that member service to the members was his highest priority, and that's the other request for another member benefit specialist. The number of retirees in the system is now about 33,000. 10 years ago in 2010, it was 22,000. So you've had an increase of more than 50% in the workload, and every retiree has address changes, there are deaths, there are changes to the benefits, changes to the bank accounts, all that's got to go through our distribution department. And then there's all these people that are retiring. The number of new retirements keeps going up every year, and we've had a pretty big increase in that. The portal helps, the technology has helped, but it also means that people still have even more sophisticated questions. It's kind of like online shopping. You all know that. And in addition, it poses some technology issues with, password resets and things like that. And so we're having some issues in the member benefits department. We've had a large turnover. In the 7-person section, over the last 2.5 years, there are only 2 names that are the same. So 5 out of the 7 have turned over. We're seeing applications within that unit to transfer laterally to other sections within the agency. That tells you something. We did a survey of a climate survey. And in general, I would tell you that people like working for WRS. The results were very positive. But if there's one section that stood out with some issues, it's in member benefits. The overall staffing level is pretty small, and there were some fairly interesting comments that came out on that. Mainly that I like working here, but the workload is oppressive. And that was the main thing. And so. Yeah. And so that was, that's the request that the governor is sensitive to and recommends approval. So anyway, Mr. Chairman, those are the four highlighted exception requests. It's the technology budget for rain improvements, the 3 positions. I acknowledge the governor's position. I don't want to run in front of the governor, but I need to make the committee aware of the accountant situation and the analyst situation, because if we don't find a way to resolve those, I think that will come back to you. One of the way it could come back to you is there is a way that we might convert another position to fill the accountant position, but then it would be another operations person that would come to you for. It would open up another hole out of our employer relations section. So we can probably survive without it. We have to this point. As I told you, the state of the agency is pretty good. But those 2 requests, if we don't do something there, I think it will come back to you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I've concluded my initial remarks. I'm prepared to go through in detail the budget if you'd like to go there or answer any questions from you or other members of the committee.
Any questions for Dave? Senator Hicks.
So it'd be much more helpful to me, given some of the members' skepticism on the 30-year projection. If we actually had those projections that show the confidence interval, do this with stuff comes out of the Treasury Department, or treasurers with all of our other funds, halfway or whatever. Where are we at 30, 50, and 70%, or standard deviation? It would certainly provide me a lot more comfort. Could we see what those look like versus just a projected one-line assumption? Because as you guys know, the further you project past your last data point, you're going to be wrong. So where is that? Is the number you give us at the 50th percentile would be my assumption. But what I like to do, Mr. Chairman, is know what the potential downside and the potential upside of those assumptions that are being put into that model. I think it would provide a little more comfort, a lot more clarity for the committee if we could get those, maybe not now, but in the future, when we present those numbers.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, you understand this extremely well. And we do have those kind of projections with a cone of uncertainty. They were provided to the board in the November board meeting as an initial projection. And we'll have those updated when we do the actuarial results this spring. And you're exactly right. This is a 50 percentile estimate is what you see on that chart right there. But the actuary does do a sensitivity analysis to have both upside and downside projections. And the board saw that. Representative Schwartz, he saw that. And we can provide those to you as well as some updated stuff. Because that's exactly it. The further out you go, the more uncertain these things become. Things can go south. They can also go north, both ways. And the thing is, I always think that that's why these things have to be managed. You can't just set it and forget it. And I think that was probably what some pensions got used to in the 80s and the 90s. Things have obviously changed since then. And it's with this committee's support that we've had a hand on the tiller and made some good progress. But yes, we have those projections. The actuary has them, and we'll get those to you.
Could you send those, email those, the current ones, and then also?
Yeah, we'll email you the presentation that we had at a GRS at the board meeting a couple of weeks ago. That's kind of these last year numbers, and then we'll make sure you get something similar because the actuaries will brief that to us, I believe, in May.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Stiff.
Director Swindell, I assume that if you're managing $10 billion worth of assets that you have, investment managers of some kind, whether it's PIMCO or State Street or other people like that, do the fees that get paid to those investment managers, do those show up in your 900 series? Do they show up somewhere else in the budget? Do they not show up in the budget at all? Where would I find that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative said, you won't see that in our administrative budget. The budget that we're talking about today is the administrative budget that pays our salary and pays our normal consulting expenses for the actuary and things like that. But the investment manager expenses are non-administrative expenses, and we account for those. You'll see those in our financial statements, but they're not part of this budget. There's a good summary in our annual financial report. I forget which page it's on, but we can send that to you.
Thank you.
That gives you the yearly run-up. And Sam, do you have any comments on management fees? Rough order of magnitude and kind of where they're coming from?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe they're about 48, 49 million.
And those have been trending down in the last few years, my understanding. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I think the dollar amount's actually gone up. We're increasingly invested in private markets and they have higher fees. As a percentage of assets and a basis point comparison is going down because our assets have been going up. I think on a basis point, if you include our administrative expenses, which is only for the investment team, it's about 3 basis points, 3.5. But you add the management fees, I think we're around 55 basis points for the total portfolio.
So Dave, do you make that information public? Is it on your website or is it on?
It's in our comprehensive annual financial report. It's on our website. You do need to look at the report and find the page, and I can't quote it to you right offhand, but yes, it's public knowledge.
Okay.
Sam, I get that about right, is about 55 total.
That's about right.
Got my support staff.
All right, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, any questions on these 4 exception requests? After that, Mr. Chairman, how would you like me to proceed? I can go down our exception requests. There's 13 of them. I can discuss them that way, or we can go unit by unit. Which do you prefer?
Let's just go through the units,
Go through the units?
please.
Very good. And Mr. Chairman, the first unit is the 101 unit. The exception requests for this unit begin on page 24 of your packet. While everybody's finding that page, I'll just comment. This is the basic unit within the agency that performs administration of the 8 defined benefit plans. These are the people that provide the counseling, create the retirements, approve the retirements, administer the money, and send it out. And they're the people that administer death payments and put out the annual account statements. They do the work. When employees call the retirement system, this is who they talk to. The exception requests, the first one here is the information technology request, which is our normal hardware and software 200 series expenses. The total amount here is $281,295. There's $105,000 in software licenses, $37,000 in hardware, and $138,000 in various maintenance agreements. The highlights for all this in the software and licenses, $61,500 is for DataBank. DataBank is a contractor that modifies and works with the OnBase program, which is integral to the RAIN program. OnBase is a commercial software program that's heavily used in the medical industry for imaging. And, you know, if you have a surgery and you have some x-rays, they're probably contained on an OnBase imaging system somewhere. Anyway, DataBank is a contractor that works with that system and modifies it for our purposes. We don't always use all those hours because we don't always have to modify OnBase, but if we do, that's what that pays for. And then we have $17,000 for 56 licenses for Adobe, which is for document software, images, the retirement system, birth certificates, and so on. And then $27,000 for Microsoft Office licenses, which is required to work with RAIN. It's a Microsoft-based program. And then $450 for our Cougar Mountain accounting. The hardware, we're asking for 2 high-speed black and white printers to replace the black and white printers that we have. These are the same printers. We produce our own financials, our own member account statements at the end of the year. And anybody who ever has a change to their pension amount with address change, bank account change, tax change, they always get a monthly account statement. So there can be thousands of these in any given month, and we print them ourselves on these printers. They're wearing out, and the manufacturer that we have Dell's right now, and they are out of the printer business, and so we're going to go to Lexmark. We need to replace our board tablets because everybody's got these tablets for the board, and to replace 2 scanners. We've reduced this budget already. It's already been scrubbed. They're not going to replace any of our uninterrupted power supply batteries, for example, because most of us are now equipped with laptops. We bought all those in the pandemic so that we could send people to work from home, and they have their own battery supply. And so we've got some efficiencies already achieved. And then on the maintenance, the main expense there is for the on-base program and for Sitecore, which is our public website. And then there's a couple of other things. Smarty Streets is an address validation program. If somebody puts in an address for their pension and it's not a valid postal address, the program will flag it and so on. So that's that exception request. Stand for questions.
Yeah, please go on. And, and we've read the miscellaneous stuff, so you can kind of hit the
Okay.
high marks. Go ahead. Oh, Don, please.
Mr. Chairman, apologies for the interruption. Some confusion here with the Gov's rec. It notes one time and ongoing. It appears that the 138,000 for the maintenance agreement was populated in IBARs as a one-time expense. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Don, no, it really shouldn't be, because we're going to have, those are routine maintenance agreements and they will be ongoing.
Well, but they're not.
But we have to justify it every year, so I'm not sure what the difference really is.
Well, they're not annual. Usually they're 2 or 3 year maintenance agreements, are they not?
2 years is typical.
And so they're renewed, and so I think that's typically, if for maintenance agreements, if they're term limited, they're exception requests.
Yeah, very good. It's just so you understand the nature of the expense, I think is the most important thing for the committee. Kevin will get it in the budget and we'll be good.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we'll recognize the 292 as ongoing.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, the next exception request in the 101 unit is on page 27. And this is the 410 series information technology data services. This is $340,000, and it provides the budget to allow us to send money to ETS for the services they provide. And quite frankly, this budget may be a little large because we're just getting into the virtual servers that we're going to buy from ETS instead of our own servers. But they wanted us to give us plenty of authority to send them money. I understand that.
Okay. Any questions? Proceed.
The next exception request is on page 28, and these are various reclassifications and salary adjustments that took place compared to the last budget. The biggest of these was the accounting upgrade position that I described to you earlier.
So Dave, I have a question about, so all of these reclassifications are actions that have already taken place.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So what I'm curious about is the process, because we don't see a B11. So LSO isn't aware of, essentially it's a mechanism to get pay raises by realigning the job requirements of the specific positions. So what's the process you go to? And it says you talk with the HR division, but do you have communications with the chief executive office? How do you pass that information on to us prior to when you're doing it? or when you're thinking of doing it?
Yeah, this is a new requirement in the budget. In the previous submissions, this was not a requirement for other funded activities. This is the first time that as an other funded activity that we've had to provide all this and do this as an exception request. Our process was to go through A&I, get approval for the job classification, and to show them where we could find it in our budget in our 200 series or within our 100 series. We did have some savings in our 100 series because a couple of positions were reclassified lower.
So I'm not sure why it changed or why you still don't have to do that. Can you explain that? Or did you?
Well, we did all that.
Yeah.
It just didn't come to the legislative, to this body before.
So explain that to me, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, the current section 310 allows the governor to approve a salary increase. And in this exception request, that's his recommendation to do so. Ultimately, when an agency has their payroll analysis done by the state budget department, and it's greater than the previous biennium, that's going to require a budget adjustment. So we've asked the agencies to submit an exception request for transparency purposes as well. So in this case, that amount that is being currently paid is greater than the previous biennium. The budget needs to be modified somehow. And in that case, we're asking agencies to do the exception requests.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
So, and I get that. I get that's what this does, but the issue that we're struggling with is this has already been done, and now it comes to us. So, I mean, what we have in the analysis of the request is we have that there were these retirements. They took the position to do the reclassifications, then they filled the positions. So it's not prospective. This is retrospective, and so it doesn't appear that it went through your office. It doesn't appear that the governor did it. What happens is that they had some savings in 1001 and excuse me, the 100 series, fair enough. But the Wyoming retirement system, like a few other agencies, has the ability to pull up because they have this other source of revenue. And so ultimately, as we're looking at that, it's just what happens is it creates an interesting practice when you have an agency or two, because they have this kind of separate and source of funding to do that when other agencies can. And ultimately, it ends up being, I think, starts to be a policy nightmare for executive branch HR, and maybe the HR consolidations will help with that. But that's the problem we're having, is that it happened, and now we're talking about it. You didn't approve it. We didn't ever approve it. So it just happened, and now it's after the fact. So it's looking forward. What do we put in place? So that, is this going to be the policy that we do, or we have in effect another policy we all agree to, that this is how we go about doing this in state government, to keep the transparency up and to keep the playing field clear and understandable to all government, all employees.
Well, and just to follow up on that, what happens is, because of you're self-funded, you essentially can dictate the positions that you have and reclassify them. So you essentially have a higher class, higher paid folks who may be doing similar activities, depending on your classification. But you have the ability to have a higher pay scale than anyone else in the other agencies across the spectrum.
So, Mr. Chairman, two observations. First of all, I have provided draft recommendations to the governor to work this issue on the front side of the conversation. And certainly that's up to the governor. I'm not going to get in front of him. The second thing would be, we haven't had salary increases for quite a while, and the agencies are actively doing everything they can with their existing budgets to get the job done. the statutory requirements of their agency. A salary increase, as been proposed by the governor, would alleviate a lot of this by getting people closer to the market. So those are two observations.
Well, the difference is they've already given $385,000 worth of their salary increases in the last biennium. So now, if they get to give salary increases again, theoretically, they'll be that much further ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
That's what the issue is.
humbly, I disagree because we've had that conversation. This is a market adjustment. So if we do a market policy target of 85% or whatever, you pick a percentage, and somebody has received a market adjustment like this, and it pulls them up closer to the market, they're not going to get double. All they would see is that differential that we approve of the sideboards that we discussed for the market and the merit that the governor has. So it's not going to double up.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with Budget Director Hibbert. The governor has proposed a pay adjustment. You're familiar with that. It's a matrix-based system based upon where the class code is vis-a-vis the market, and then a merit-based component as well. It's going to cost us $161,000 to implement the governor's matrix. Had we not done what we did, that cost would simply be larger. But we're not going to exceed the governor's recommendations on pay increases or levels within any of the class codes.
That actually not correct. Had you not reclassified, then you would just get this pay increase. What you did is you reclassify employees so you can pay them more. And honestly, it's not just you, other agencies do it, but it's more open because we can see those processes because they go through ANI and we see them as they happen. And we get ANI's comments on it. In fact, the treasurer's office did it, and he basically violated the ANI rules when he did it and kind of acted more like you did. He just gave pay increases 2 steps above anyone else, how they were rated. But, we're just seeing I appreciate what you did, because by you seeing the number changes, you alert us to what transpired over the last biennium. And I wouldn't say I wouldn't do the same thing at your point. I'm saying from our side, we're going, well, we need to understand how this works and where people move and how the system works so we can have a better understanding of it. And it's not just a governor's decision. We can make the decision. We can make a decision, say retirement, we're going to start managing your budget and your employees. We can do it if we choose to. And what keeps us from doing it is the good job you do as being an independent agency. Game and Fish used to be under us and now it moved out. Retirement or YDOT used to be underneath us and it moved out in different times and places, all for different reasons. And I think probably for the better, but these are the things that we're particular about and sensitive to. So we just want to let you know that we're going, well, this is interesting. I wish we knew more beforehand. That's all. I mean, that's kind of where we're coming from, at least I am. So. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, if I may.
Go ahead.
So Director Swindell, so referring to ANI's publication about how the compensation would affect your agency, I appreciate that there's not a need to bring your employees up to market because they're pretty much at market now.
We're at 94% of market, so we're about 6% behind, but that's better than the state is as a whole. They're in the 80s.
And so, yeah. And so, Mr. Chairman, then there's the sort of merit piece of it, or the matrix piece of it, of $161,000. And my question is, if you had not done what you did, would the matrix piece still be $161,000, or would it have been some different number?
We'd be further behind market, so it would be larger.
Would the matrix piece have been larger though, or smaller? Because I understand that the market piece of it obviously would have had to have been larger if you hadn't bumped people up. I'm just curious about this reclassification and how that affects the merit aspect of it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sith, the matrix incorporates both market and individual performance. There's a merit component. Yes, you're correct. The merit component is separate. But most of the movement in the governor's proposal is frankly, to be moving us closer to market. The pay adjustments that we were able to do moved us a little closer to market. And so we don't have as far to get to the governor's proposal as we would have otherwise.
Okay. Further questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the next exception request in the 101 Defined Benefit Administrations Unit is on page 29, and that is to add to the CPA accountant in the finance department. I think I've described that in some detail. Are there any more questions on that?
And that's the governor's denial on that.
But the governor has elected to defer on that one. But I felt the need to bring it to your attention because I do think if we can't find some way to solve that problem, it will come back to you.
Meaning another reclassification or?
Well, here's how that could work. Mr. Chairman, it could exactly be that. What I would do, if I get a vacancy in the employer relations section, they have a grade 8. These are accounting positions, but they're not licensed CPAs. If you fully fund the technology budget and we achieve certain efficiencies in employer contribution processing, we might be able to take that position, persuade A&I to reclassify that to a grade 11. That'd be a big expense change. Find some money in the budget somehow, some way. And then perhaps we could propose to move that position to finance. But if we did that, then the next exception request I'm going to talk to you about, and the one the governor does recommend, is another member benefit specialist. Mr. Chairman, they really need 2 people. I intend to get this one from employer relations. But if I have to send it and reclassify and create an accountant out of it, then I'll come back to you for another person in operations. And you'll say, wait a minute, didn't we add one? Yes, you did. But I had to steal from, rob Peter to pay Paul. Because I do think that it's an important thing to get a handle on the accountant position, because I just don't think you can run 2-person control with 1 person.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. More recently, ANIHR has been delivering these pay proposals to the state budget department. And we are collaborating with the agencies to basically see their section 310 is met before the approval is provided. So for example, the AG's office presented a proposal. Those came over to the state budget department. We met with the AG's office, looked at their section 310 and balanced their budget before we move forward with those position changes. So that is happening now.
Mr. Chairman, somebody remind me what section 310 says.
Mr. Chairman, originally, I think back in 2013, they established it, and I think it was 359 then. Basically what it said was for general funds, you cannot cross a biennium above your previous biennium's budget for salary. Now benefits are different, but for salary. And then that's gone forward a few times. Last iteration, similar information was provided in section 310, and the governor line item vetoed some of the requirements out of that and basically left it to be, with the governor's approval, you can have a salary modification.
But as I understand it, section 310B, the 2020 budget, says that if they have a change in funding, that it requires some type of B11 authorization, even including other funds, meaning your account, that has to be submitted, that then would show up, that LSO would see, and then it would show up on our documentation. But that did not happen with these particular.
Mr. Chairman, no argument, but with the proposed language that I've developed, it basically says with the governor or his designee may, and it allows the same thing for the judicial branch. Then it further goes in and says, if the agency cannot balance their budget to the prior biennium in that sense, then it's going to precipitate an exception request to the legislature for your approval. That's where we're headed. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to make this a budget requirement and still provide the flexibility for the agency to be able to use their salary budget to meet the statutory requirements that are necessary.
I understand that.
And I understand that, but I'm still trying to process, Dave, I'm trying to process your last answer, because the way I interpreted your last answer was, I'm gonna do whatever the heck I want to do. I'm gonna reclassify what I'm gonna reclassify. I'm gonna do what it is. And so JC legislature, you do whatever you want. I'm gonna do whatever I want. That's the way I interpreted your last answer. I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's the way I interpreted it.
Mr. Chairman, may I please?
I think Dave should answer first. He's the one who was asked the question.
I was hoping Kevin would bail me out. No, of course not. I'm not going to do whatever I want. That would have to go through a lot of approvals. It could require a B11 if we couldn't find other savings in our 100 series. It would have to be approved by A&I that it was appropriate. And we needed that. Wouldn't be an increase in headcount, but it could be a shift in duties, and the duties would be arranged and paid in accordance with those duties. So it could be done, and maybe it not. In that case, it would come back to this committee, as I still need the accountant if I can't fix it some other way.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm struggling perhaps the same way Chairman Perkins is, because what I just heard you say is, but if we had it in our Series 100, we'd still go ahead and do it. And what we're saying here is, if there's a denial of this position, no means no. Whether you've got money someplace, rat hole or whatever, no means no. And so if you think about manipulating funds or moving stuff around, now there's a process going across divisions to be 11, but it makes me really anxious to have an agency. And fair enough, I may not be understanding you correctly, Dave, but you know, if the position's denied, that's what we mean.
Well, like I say, in the past, I'm going by, you know, what was done in the past. And I'm just trying to, like Kevin said, trying to manage the agency. It's not like I can do whatever I want. But if we had the money in our 100 series previously, yes, it did not have to come back. But now it will. That's okay. I think we have a good working relationship with this body. I think you understand the issue. I just want to, and the governor is not recommending this exception request. But I do feel it's an urgent need and that the committee needs to be aware of it.
But Mr. Chairman, follow up. You have to understand that we have a lot of agencies come before us with what they feel are urgent needs. And there's times that we agree with that, and there's times that we don't. But when we don't, that's what we mean.
Understand.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Kevin a question? Kevin, so the process you described, so let's go through that. The money's in the budget. There's some vacancies. They want to upgrade a position. So the director then goes to A&I and asks for an upgrade. But what I want to know is the participation of the budget office in reviewing, is it every one of those upgrades that goes through A&I? Getting back to the governor's approval or his designee. So is that the intent? Or at what level would you draw that? I mean, if it's a janitorial position going. So describe to me within the administrative branch, based on what you've said and the scenarios we've played out. When does the budget office and the governor's office weigh in on these upgrades? If there's already money within that budget from the biennium because of vacancies and they want to upgrade the position. Could you explain that to me, please?
Mr. Chairman, I can explain. There's a form that's required by the agency to submit to A&I HRD to modify a salary. If that salary can be modified within their existing budget by moving funding from perhaps somebody that had 30 years in and just retired, and that position that money would be over the market, then that agency could use that money to move it to another position that needs to have a market adjustment so that we can battle retention. That form is submitted to HRD, and there's a box on that form, and it says, is this going to cause, do you have budget authority for this change? And if you don't, then that comes to the state budget department. And then we work with the agencies. Really good example was recently with the AG's office. So I'll just repeat this again. The agencies can manage their table of organization, their positions within their existing budget to meet the statutory requirements of the department. If they want to make a modification that's in excess of their overall budget, then they have to come to the state budget department, and then we review that. So we'll take a look at our Section 310 reports, which we have. We run them constantly, and we'll sit down with the agency. So with the AG recently, we showed them that they actually did have the money in their budget to accomplish that. So it didn't require the next step. The next step would be if it is going to be in excess of the budget, then we would go to the governor's office and seek approval to make that modification. And then eventually it would have to come through a budget adjustment through an exception request. So that's what we're practicing right now. And also remember that the original 359 and 310 for the last couple of iterations was just focused on general funds. Recently, the way it worked out, that it became special revenue and federal funds. So that's probably why these special revenue agencies got into this situation. But what we did, and Chairman Nicholas has said, the state budget department did not allow these adjustments to happen in the budget department adjustments of the Chapter 17. We identified them and we requested the agencies to put in requests to the legislature to modify their budget to this extent. So hopefully that helps.
So,
Mr. Chairman,
no,
so
well,
then-
no, it did for most of the agencies. But so Kevin, what you just said, or at least the way I heard what you just said is, so went back and checked if they have a budget authority. Well, there's a number of agencies, and these are the agencies in which we've seen these things trickling. You know, it's been the Board of Realtors, it's been the Department of Transportation, WRS. It's these folks that have these other revenue funds. So what I heard from you is if it exceeds budget authority, or it's not within the budget authority, or they don't think it is, then it bounces to you and you look at it and it goes to the governor. If it doesn't get there, then it doesn't bounce up, and maybe it doesn't rise the level of the section we're referring to. But when we talk about budget authority, when you have these other special revenue sources or other fund sources, how does it work in those instances?
Mr. Chairman, now they're treated all the same. And you're correct. There's a trickle here of some special revenue agencies that we've identified and we've asked to do exception requests, and you've seen those exception requests. But it's really a trickle. And I think really what it is that once upon a time, it was just general funds that we had to do. The special revenue agencies had a little bit of flexibility, but we still controlled it because, for example, if it was a standalone position that only one agency would have, like maybe a geologist or something, you know, that's not going to have impacts across the enterprise. But we controlled it to say, if it's an accountant, we don't want accountants in special revenue agencies, you know, and have no accountants in the budget department because we can't compete with that because they're general funds. So there were still controls in place, and HRD has really done a fine job on that to manage the enterprise. And you've heard about that. So in these cases, it really is a trickle, but I believe that what you're seeing here today is the responsible, correct methodology to present this to you. And we're working on trying to find something that's mutually agreeable for the future to address this.
We appreciate that, and that's why we're having this discussion now. It's not been an enterprise, it's not gotten out of hand, but I mean, we all see where that goes if it's not dealt with. And so I don't have a, it's really about the plan going forward and how we do it. And so we appreciate that. It's a work in process. So we appreciate, at least I do. I appreciate the clarification, and I think that's helpful. And again, I think that, I understand also that we're an organization of humans, and that, not everything always goes according to plan. And so, we appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact that that like good supervisors and good managers, that folks trying everything they can to take care of their people. I appreciate that. But it's always trying to find the right balance to make sure we're, that there's the accountability, there's the transparency, all the things that we all want. So anyway, so I appreciate that. And I just, we'll keep working on it.
I think that's the mission. This is a difficult process. We need to continue to find a path that we can work with. But one of the things is the state budget department perspective is we're going to show you. It's not going to be a chapter 17. We're going to show you.
So Mr. Chairman and Kevin, the nuance of this conversation that I think that I need a little clarification on is with the explanation you just made, these are existing positions that have been authorized within an agency that they can move money around in. And so we have a request here of a new position, a position that was never authorized. And so if we say no to that position, and then as we heard, maybe I've got some other funds available. It's not just the funding. If they've got the funding, but they don't have an authorized position to put the funds to. Am I seeing that correct?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, it's always been the mission of the state budget department and the chief executive to follow the will of what the intent is. So no is no. Yeah. Agencies can reclassify positions, and they can balance their table of organization within their budget to meet retention requirements.
A not for now thing. If Don, if you could later send me what the 310 started out looking like and what it looked like after the governor's line items. I'm curious. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. So slightly diverting from this conversation, you have two positions here in priority 9, the accountant, and priority 10, the benefit specialist. And I thought I heard you earlier in the day say that if you had your preference and you're only getting one position out of the day, you would take the accountant over any other position. Is that correct?
That was my priority that I submitted to the governor's office. That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, onwards to the member benefit position that referenced by Representative Walters. I've already talked about this some. This is on page 30 of this unit. Just a couple of points. Again, this is a 7-person section. It is the basics of what employees call when they call the retirement system. Our workload keeps growing up. It's the number of retirements processed is up 40% over the last 12 years. You should know that each month there are hundreds of phone calls that go to voicemail because no one's available to answer the phone. Typically in June, there was 145 of those. In March, where it really picks up with the teachers, we had 298 of those. The turnover in this unit is 5 out of 7 in the last 2.5 years. It's a 71% turnover. And the comments in our employment survey is we're behind. WRS has been great, but sometimes the system lags, but it's understandable. My concern is the workload. It's too heavy and it causes burnout. The staffing level of 7 is only 62% of what our peer systems have in a study that we engaged in a couple of years ago. By example, a comparative system, the Missouri system has 12 people in their section doing similar work. We have 7. The governor does recommend approval of this request, and I think it would help the workload and help member services. Right now, it takes about anywhere around 42 days to get a formal estimate. If you call up and say, look, I want my account audited and know what my benefit's going to be, it's about 42 days out. Our standard would be 10 working days, about 2 weeks, about 14 days calendar. The Missouri example is one of 7 peer systems that were examined by Funston Advisory Services in their 2018 review of the system. Moser's is a simple system because they don't have the local government employees. It's just state employees. They have about 51,000 active members. We have about 41,000 active members. Assets under management are similar. So they rated it as a peer system.
The monthly newsletters, everything that comes out, you guys are a service-minded entity, and we all appreciate that. You do a good job. You really do. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would just tag on to that. I'm proud to hear the fact that the employees in the state of Wyoming work 1.5 times harder than they do in the state of Missouri. So, kudos to those folks. But it did confirm my suspicions, by the way. We do have a tendency to work a little harder around the state.
all they do is walk around and say, show me.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, it does give me an opportunity to brag a little bit. Yeah, we've had some rookies coming into this section. They are great people. They are working hard and they enjoy their work. They understand the purpose of it. It's an advantage of working in retirement because the mission is pretty clear and perhaps more clear than in some other government jobs that I've been associated with. And that helps. But they probably could use really do need another person. And the governor does recommend approval of this exception request.
All right, on we go.
On page 31 is a simple exception request. This is to provide for an actuarial audit. The amount is $100,000. What an actuarial audit is we would hire another actuary firm to take our data that GRS, our current actuary, works with, and to see if they can replicate the results and analyze their findings. This was last done in 2017. That's what it cost. We hired Kavanaugh out of their Nebraska office to audit GRS. In general, they thought the GRS was doing a good job and their assumptions and modeling was correct. They had a couple of suggestions, but it's just best practice to do that about every 5 years. And we're coming up on that. And that's what that request is. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the exception requests in the 101 unit.
Yeah, you've got your shift.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more, the shift. This is on page 32. It's an $87,000 shift between the deferred compensation unit and the defined benefit program unit. And this is simply to have the budget reflect the way we're expensing the space rental. There was an old formula in the system that had to do with square footage of office space and how you allocated the common areas and so on. It was different than the way we proportion other common expenses, which is as a proportion of assets. And so that's the way we are expensing it, but the budget authority hasn't really caught up with that. It hasn't been brought to your attention before because we've had other issues like building the investment team, kind of took all the oxygen out of the room. But I thought I'd try to get it fixed for this session.
How's your participation in the 557 plan been going the last couple of years?
The participation is good. Automatic enrollment really helps. We're having about a 97% stick rate in state employees, and it's increasingly a model for local employees. Natrona County, Albany County, a couple of the big school districts are starting to understand the wisdom of just making that the default. They can get out of it, but the automatic, the default is you're in. We have about, Mike, I think about 16,000 active contributing members at this point, about 26,000 accounts. The funds in the 457 really aren't managed by WRS. We're just doing the accounting. They're managed by the individuals, of course, but we crossed over $1 billion this year.
Okay, 1 billion.
1 billion in the 457 plan. You know, the other thing I'd point out, Mr. Chairman, the fees that we charge members have consistently gone down. When WRS took over the program in 2001, I believe, we were charging 55 basis points as just an administrative fee on top of your investment expenses. That has now been dropped progressively over the years. We're now at 20 basis points. And we continue because of the growth of the program, you achieve some efficiencies of scale. In November, the board approved a fee holiday for the coming year. No one will pay any administrative basis points in 2022. And when it comes back, they're looking to reestablish it at 18 basis points. So that's a remarkable record in value for our members.
Go ahead.
So it's now an opt-out program, as I understand it. What are the percentage of people that opt out when they sign in?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, the total opt-out rate is less than 3%. The stick rate's 97. Yeah, and that is broken out into, you know, when do they opt out, initially or later on? And we have those numbers, but I don't have them handy.
I'm curious how you pay for a fee holiday.
Mr. Chairman, the way that you pay for a fee holiday is that the 20 basis points enters into an administrative account that's held at the record keeper at Empower. And we draw on that account to pay our administrative budget, to pay our people and make our administrative expenses. But the account keeps growing. The goal for that is to have 2 years in reserve. But when it becomes in excess of 2 years in reserve, then we reduce the rate. And that's what we've been doing. But another way to kind of top off or to keep a lid on the administrative account and keeping it from going too big is to just not charge any fees for a period of time. And that's what the consultant recommended and for this year. And the board approved that in November for 2022. So Merry Christmas to all the 457 account members.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
So that was, anyway, the exception request on page 32 is just a shift of 87,000 from one unit to the other to more rationalize how we pay for space rental and not to overcharge the 457 plan. And Mr. Chairman, the next unit is part of the administrative division. It's the 103 investment unit. There is an exception request on page 39. It gets into previous reclassification and salary adjustments, similar to the flavor that we discussed earlier. The amount is $43,000. And then the second exception request in this unit is to add one more in investment analyst. That is to I gave you the story earlier of how we modified one of the investment analysts to be an investment accountant, but that does essentially leave Sam a little short on investment professionals. And Sam, I'd invite you to talk about the role of the analysts and what they play. And again, the governor does not recommend approval of this exception request, but I think you will see it in a supplemental or in next year's budget if we don't deal with it. I do respect the governor's decision for now, but it does leave us short. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so our needs change over time, and I think we've seen returns have been very strong. Our portfolio's larger now, and in general, the markets have, I think over the last 40 years, benefited from declining interest rates, and we're at the point where they're probably going to increase from here, and it's going to make generating returns that much harder. And so we're going to need to spend more time trying to produce the same types of returns. We have some additional needs in terms of private equity. We had 0% private equity exposure 6 or 7 years ago. We've been ramping that up over the last 5 years. In the most recent fiscal year, we had a 58% return in private equity, so it's been very successful, but it's more complicated than a lot of traditional investments, and it will take more resources. We've had a private credit portfolio in place for probably going back to 2010. There were a lot of legacy investments that did not perform well. And so we hired a new person a few years ago to focus on private credit. He's built out the program, and that's performed very well too, but it's more complicated. We're also in the process of rolling out a risk management system called Allborn, and that's most of the way done. It'll be finalized the next month or two. That'll help us better analyze our exposures and risks and potentially prevent losses, but it'll take more resources to work with. So overall, I think the team's the strongest it's ever been. Everyone's working very hard, and I think with the increased demands, I think over time it's probably not sustainable. So it's really important that we get this extra person in place. And just to put in perspective, the cost of this new employee would be the equivalent of about 1,000th of 1% of the portfolio. So if we were able to hire this person, even the smallest improvement they could make to performance be paying for themselves.
Any questions for Sam?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Masudis, earlier when you spoke about the investment manager fees being about $48 million or so, or total combined 55 basis points, did that include fees from the private equity holdings, or the private equity fees a separate beast, a separate animal?
Yes, so that includes the management fees at the parent level. So it doesn't necessarily include underlying fees of any funds held by them, which is kind of the standard industry practice.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. About of the $10 billion roughly you're managing, how much is in private equity, roughly speaking?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, it's about $1 billion now in private equity.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
how many people do we have in the investment office sector within WRS? What's your stats?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, so we have 7 investment people, including myself, and then we have the investment accounting person.
So it's a staff of 8, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks.
Repeat that, please.
It's a staff of 8.
8.
1 chief investment officer, 3 seniors, 1 investment officer, 2 analysts, and 1 investment accountant. In the summer, we get 2 interns.
Say that again.
Okay. The staff of the investment team consists of 1 chief investment officer, 3 senior investment officers, 1 investment officer, 2 analysts, 1 investment accountant,
Mr. Chairman.
2 interns in the summer.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Well, my thought is what I would like to do is look at the comparison of what we have in the state treasurer's office based on the size of the portfolio. Maybe that's not a fair comparison. How would we look at something to make an equitable determination of what the appropriate staff level is? Is there some metric out there that consultants have looked at? Director Swindell or Director?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it's not as simple, unfortunately, just looking at employees per assets, because it depends on the complexity of the portfolio. So for instance, the treasury portfolio has 10 billion in fixed income. That's all pretty straightforward. So it doesn't necessarily require as many people.
So I'm looking at the investment unit, page 42, and it has 10 people. So you have 8 investment staff in that, and 2 staff members? Support members?
Mr. Chairman, those other 2 are the summer interns.
Those are the interns. I see. And the particular person you want to hire is going to specialize in what?
Mr. Chairman, it would be an analyst. They wouldn't necessarily specialize. It's most likely they would work in the private investments. So be private equity, private real assets.
Okay. All right, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pick up speed to 2 divisions that are a little unusual. Back in the 80s, the legislature approved certain ad hoc COLA increases for members of the Highway Patrol and the Game and Fish departments, as long as they were paid for by the departments each year. Every budget, we need to adjust those amounts because they keep going down. So we actually have a unit, a 601 unit on page 47 of your report. And there's an exception request to, it says eliminate the WRS budget. We just want to eliminate part of it because the number of people involved with this has gone down from 22 to 18, and now it's 15. So we just need less budget authority.
Same with the Game and Fish.
And the same for Game and Fish, which is on page.
Okay, next.
Page 52 and 53.
Okay, deferred comp.
And then the last unit is the 457 unit. It's the deferred comp unit. It's numbered as 6501. And there is 2 exception requests in this unit. One is the salary adjustments in the amount of 39,000, same flavors we talked before in the other units. And then the 87,000 shift appears as a negative adjustment in this budget to compensate for the positive 87 in the other. So it's an in and an out.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe that completes the run through and all the exception requests.
All right. Any further questions? For Dave, for Sam, for Mike, for Ben. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy holidays to all the members of this committee. I appreciate all the support and the relationship that we have.
Tom, anything else?
No, just echoing Dave's comments. Thank you to everybody on the committee, and we really appreciate it. And I think we all should be proud of sort of where the system is today. Thank you. And Merry Christmas.
Love the returns. One more good year.
Right now, I'm just looking for another good 14 trading days.
Yeah.
Markets have been pretty volatile, but I think we'll still wind up with some good returns this year. We'll see. You never know.
You never know.
Yes. All right. Take care. See you, Sam. Let's get Don, give us a little update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. First of all, hearkening back to the Miners Hospital Board.
Mic on?
Yes, hearkening back to the Miners Hospital Board earlier this morning, I believe, but Co-Chairman Perkins spoke to the use of the term interest in Wyoming Statute 36102. And we did evaluate that with a couple of the legal staff. And that is actually a one-time transfer that was made historically prior to the fact of the state investing in equity. So
we're fine. We picked it up with earnings last year.
Yes, the earnings.
As far as everything else.
Correct. Looking forward to tomorrow. The governor is scheduled to present his ARP recommendations. And
I tell you, I'm so excited about that.
And we will get the information then?
Yeah. It's, yeah, you don't get a preview. No spoiler alert. Come on.
We have 2 hours scheduled for that discussion, but it's possible that could go longer or shorter. Not sure what to expect there.
His excellent gets to go, gets however much time.
So is Kevin.
Following that, we have a small agency, the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund. Following up is the Department of Workforce Services prior to the lunch break in the morning. In the afternoon, you have 5 agencies, including the Gaming Commission, formerly the Parimutuel Commission.
I lost page 2.
The Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So I believe those 2 entities are coming down from Casper. And then Wyoming Energy Authority will present to you. That's the combination of the Pipeline Authority and the Infrastructure Authority pursuant to, I believe it was House Bill 50 in 2019. And then after the break in the afternoon, the Geological Survey coming in from Laramie, followed by the Game and Fish at 4 p.m. The Game and Fish does not have a budget before you. There is no book associated with that. They do have one transfer of HR positions, which could be noted in one form or another in your work with the budget, but primarily they're here to walk through a slide presentation, which is in your pre-session materials. It's a PowerPoint slide presentation of the commission budget and their revenues and expenditures associated. At this time, we
Donna,
still.
you're gonna pass out the slide presentation to us tomorrow?
We can do so, yes. And we can also include it in the PDF summary that is shared with members. As of this time, Friday continues to be TBA, and based on the direction of the co-chairman, whether or not you wanted to meet at all that day or not, we were not able to move any more agencies from January due to scheduling conflicts. So we don't have any of those scheduled.
So for the people that do not want to stay one more day, if they want to go home tomorrow night, Mr. Co-Chair, what's your thinking on that? I'm fine with it. I don't know.
I think we just work through the schedule tomorrow, and if it holds to what we've been doing, we'll finish a little early, and we've only had one day where we've probably really gone over. So I would anticipate we'll be out of here tomorrow evening, although, I think we just have to watch the weather, and we've got to make a decision about getting home safely. Getting home is more home. Getting home safely is more important than just getting home. So.
Okay.
You may be skiing all the way home.
Yes.
So nothing on Fridays.
That's right. There's nothing we planned for Friday, and Representative Schwartz, I'm not your daddy.
Okay, we'll be adjourned.